this doesn't seem on the face of it to be insurmountable, and but also on the face of it, sometimes those two countries have really had a bad history with each other. Eventually, after that is solved or not solved, there is an invasion of Europe by way of Italy. Italy is conquered, Rome is destroyed, just like it was said earlier when we were talking about the problems of the 112th Pope. Eventually the Pope leaves Rome, and in his leaving, the city is then of Seven Hills is destroyed. Now, in that process, the church is also in crisis. The church has, according to this theory, has also finally become subject to falling and dismemberment. But so has the Protestant church, because some of the same problems faced by the Catholic Church are the ones also faced by the Protestants and even by the establishment Muslims. So finally, the whole religious community is under attack. And so nobody gets away free. The conflicts occur until the end of the 20s, 2029, for example, was widely discussed, and there will be, before there is an end to World War III, and is ended eventually by the disruption of the entire planet and the death of many, many people. So, what are we to say about the way this happens and how it comes to pass? First of all, it's very important to know that in terms of our conclusions, that it is deception that will be our biggest problem. The deception occurs at many levels. One can be deceived, for example, by the church. Perhaps not even willingly, perhaps out of the best of motives, but it is one way by which deception comes. People will say, I know the answer. I see Christ himself behind this event. I see that, well, that is exactly the way deception can occur. Listen, there are people who say, I believe in the rapture, and I'm certainly, as a Christian, willing to accept the fact that it does appear in Scriptures. At the same time, one can say, okay, we're going to come back to that in a minute. At the moment, let's break this off and see you again shortly. Thank you. Okay, we're back with the final 15-minute segment of this session on the Pope, the Prophet, and the Beast. And we're finishing up. We did finish on some of the things we know about each one of those three and perhaps how they're related. And so now we come to the time of conclusions and wondering what we can do about it. Well, clear message is that during this period of time, there is great deception. We're deluded by ideas and beliefs which lead many astray. In fact, one of the whole conditions of the final papacy, is that there is a great loss of faith throughout Christendom. There is an apostasy. And why do you suppose that happens? It's because there is going to, at the end, is going to be a massive amount of deception in the world. Well, let's talk about the way in which this deception comes. And remember, this is not a small matter. This is not like having a debate or about whether or not it is wise to baptize anybody younger or older. This is not a commonplace kind of a question about the deception to be employed. This is a great deception, and if we can, unless we talk in those terms, and they'll be shocking to you, unless we talk in those terms, we won't understand how much of a trial and tribulation is coming, could be coming. Deception can, first of all, it can occur from the church. Well, what would such a deception look like? A deception like that could be, for example, suppose that the time comes when the Temple Mount is in fact attacked in some way. Suppose that the opportunity arises for someone to build a third temple. Suppose that in this third temple, which is then by that time covered with some of the old furniture, in fact, maybe even the so-called Ark of the Covenant, maybe that also appears there. Maybe a church or the church or some other group of churches decide that a figure should occupy that throne, and that figure then proclaims themselves to be God and to be worshipped. We say, well, that will never happen. Well, I don't know. It may indeed happen, but it is a kind of a thing in which there is complicity on the part of a great many people. Billions of people might be tempted to believe that. Well, that is one way in which deception can occur. Deception may also occur by virtue of another religion. Suppose some other religion says, aha, you see, we now have the power and we will tell you what to believe. And there are some people who would accept that, who would say, okay, I don't really want to have a big argument and a fight with my neighbor or with the rest of the world, and therefore I am going to accept that kind of instruction. That is another way in which deception can come to us. There is a third way, and you'll maybe, and this is actually one which we are not now facing, but which could be a difficulty in the future. There are people who believe and think that there is, in fact, there are extraterrestrials, that there are people here, humans, or at least looking like us, who are from other solar systems and planets, and from other even within this galaxy, but they may be from other galaxies. And you say, I don't think that that's true, But you may not think so. If it were to occur, there is another way, however, in which you may be deceived. Suppose they arrived one afternoon and they had spaceships 4 miles wide and 4 miles and a mile and a half deep, capable of handling 10 to 15 or 20 or 50,000 people at a time. Suppose they also announced that everybody who wants to get away from the Earth, which was going to be destroyed, wants to get away from this, that these spaceships would be glad to take them to Mars. And there are people who would say, yeah, really, I don't want to be, life is so important to me that I'm going to go, I'd rather be someplace in Mars. And so these people stand in line and get on those spaceships and get taken off in order to then only to worship another person, another personality, another individual, another race or group. Well, is that liable to happen? Well, you got to admit the probability of that is somewhere between 1 and 10%, I would guess, because it's never happened before. If and when it happens, it is, however, the kind of deception that a lot of people would fall into, would be subject to. Anything else? Oh, yeah. What about the log in our own eye? That is, what about the condition in which we believe that we are superior and to everybody else? And we need to be among those who are saved because we have been given the truth. Everyone else is wrong and we're right. Well, that, of course, is one of the great deceptions of all time. It is the one that we're always subject to, and we're always an error into which we're always falling. Well, we have not used many biblical references during the course of this presentation, and it is not because we don't believe the Bible. It's because a great many people have already used these references and many times. Some of them, of course, need to be said again, and I'm going to read to you an important one from 2 Thessalonians. Here's the way that goes. Concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered to him, we ask you, brothers, Paul is writing this, not to become easily unsettled or alarmed by some prophecy, report, or letter supposed to have come from us, saying that the day of the Lord is already come. See, this is another kind of deception which could have been practiced. And not only could have been, it apparently was practiced in those days. Don't let anyone deceive you in any way. Again, identifying the problem pretty clearly. For that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. He will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God. Okay, maybe he is even in the temple at Jerusalem and asking to be worshipped. He will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. Now, does it seem a little bit more these fanciful ideas, which I had earlier identified, are they being foreseen by Paul himself in 2 Thessalonians? Are you beginning to get an impression about the kinds of deception that might be practiced upon us? As we get toward the end, I want to acknowledge the kind of people who have put a lot of work into this. I personally have no psychic ability. I'm not a clairvoyant. No one, God has not descended upon my right shoulder and told me anything. But there are people, a number of people, who have received information in that way, and there are others who have simply done extremely good research on the probabilities of the past and perhaps been able to guess what the future is going to bring. I want to identify some of those people now because they certainly are the ones who deserve the credit. For example, two writers who work together are Thomas Horn and Chris Putnam. They have now half a dozen books out, including one published just this month of April in 2013, and they deserve all the credit that there is, that can be given for the work that they have done. There is another individual called Malachi Martin. Father Martin was an exorcist, actually, a man who cared deeply about the Christian church in general, and had a number of books before he died in 1999, and some people are willing to believe that it was done mysteriously. Dolores Cannon is another writer and individual who brought us many of the insights from her work with Nostradamus, and she needs to be congratulated for her help and to us all. Finis Dake is a writer who talked about the rapture and the second coming, and he too, an individual who deserves our great respect. And finally, the stories in the scriptures themselves: Matthew, Mark, Thessalonians, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, Book of Revelations, Daniel, so forth. In conclusion, we may yet escape these terrible trials if we believe in the Lord Himself and your neighbor as yourself. Thank you.